Okay, so now we turn to the topic of externalities. There are essentially two: negative externalities and positive externalities. So we begin with analyzing the welfare implications of a negative externality. So what are the welfare implications of a negative externality? Okay, so here we see still our demand and supply analysis. So here we have our supply function. But now if it comes to a negative externality, we have to think of it that private production has an additional social cost. So the standard example of a negative externality is pollution. So assume there is an industry that is located near, let's say, a river, and the industry emits pollutants into the river, but it doesn't have to pay for it. So very often the problem of an externality is that we have like resources like land, water and air, and most of the time we use those resources as a depository or reservoir of pollutants without having to pay for it. But if, let's say, this industry pollutes the river, then maybe the fish absorb some of the toxics or toxins, and people maybe drink from the river, and then there are like some health issues, like children don't develop the way they should, people get sick, people need to see a doctor. So those are all social costs. So the way we think in economics about a negative externality, that in addition to the supply function, which only captures private costs of producing, so it is the reservation price, it's a lineup of firms according to their reservation price from lowest to highest reservation price, but the reservation price is only the price that a firm would have to charge in order to cover all operational expenses. But if, let's say, an industry can emit pollutants into the river without having to pay for it, it's not part of the reservation price because it's not part of the operational expenses, because they get that for free. But it is a cost to society because people get sick and they eat bad fish and those kind of things. So let's assume that for every unit that we produce, there is an additional social cost of 2. So that means that we have to shift up the private supply function by 2. And so what we get now is the real economic supply function, which captures everything, the private cost or the cost to cover the operational expenses, plus the cost to the society as a whole, which are not internalized, and which is why they are called an externality. So now we have additional social costs, I call that SC, social cost of 2. So every unit that we produce creates now an additional cost of 2. So now we get our real supply function, which is the supply function covering all the operational expenses that the producers have to pay for, plus the social cost, which are additional costs for which the producer is not held accountable for. So now that means that our reference scenario, which always used to be this one here, this is now no longer anymore our reference scenario, because when it comes to an externality, we have to say, you know, what is the social optimum? And in the social optimum, we would account for all cost, private and social. So in the social optimum, the intersection between demand and all cost, so the reservation price should include not only the private cost, the cost to cover the operational expenses, but also the cost to society. So that means that our true price should be 7 and the true quantity should only be 3. So that is the social optimum. And this is now our reference case. Okay, so now we can do our reference case scenario or the social optimum scenario. So social optimum scenario. Okay, so now we have again our parameter. And we have our value. Okay, so the price, the equilibrium price, should be 7. The equilibrium quantity or quantity demanded then should be 3, and quantity supplied should be 3. So the quantity turned over should be 3. And the consumer surplus is now this triangle here. So let's make that again in green. So the consumer surplus is everything below the demand function, the price, okay, so this is the consumer surplus. So we have an area of 3 times 3 over 2, so that's 4.5. What about producer surplus? So producer surplus is the everything below the price that the producers get and above the supply function, but in this case, of course, we do everything with respect to the private cost plus social cost. So this should be producer surplus in the social optimum. And as you can see, this area is also 4.5. So producer surplus is 4.5. So total welfare or total surplus is 9. So this is now our reference case with which we compare everything. So we have a new benchmark scenario, and now we just examine what happens with the non-internalization of the social cost. Well, if we don't internalize social cost, then the price is 6 and the quantity turned over is 4. So now we have the externality scenario. Okay, so we have again our parameter and our value. Okay, so the actual price is now 6, quantity demanded, quantity supplied, and quantity turned over, that is now all 4. And we can see that the consumer surplus is now much bigger. And let me draw this one maybe again using this triangle here so we can overlap it. Format, shape. Okay, so this is our consumer surplus, and this is again now 1, 2, 3, 4 times 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 times 4 is 16 over 2, that's 8. And producer surplus is everything below the price that the producers get, which is 6, and above the cost. And so now we actually draw that here. So let's give it a different color. Okay. So that means technically the producers get the price of 6. But the way we can think of it, that in addition to 6, the reservation price, they get basically a cost reduction of 2 because they don't have to pay for the social cost, which is like they get a higher price, right? Because they get something for free. So they have private cost of 6, but there's another social cost. So the way you can think of it, that the producers, they actually almost get the price of 8. So that is the de facto price that they get simply because they get the social cost for which they normally should pay for, they get that for free. But it doesn't matter. I mean, this triangle here is the same as the one down here, right? So, but you know, I think it's better to put it here because we have to think of it that the price that the producers get in de facto is the price of 6, which people pay at the cashier, but then they can use the resources for free by emitting their pollutants into a river. And for every unit produced, they get another 2 units essentially for free, which reduces the cost. But it is an implicit price increase, at least for the society. So the price that the society actually pays is not 6, but 8. Okay, so this is the price essentially that the producers get, 6 at the cashier plus 2 for not having to pay for the pollutants. And so this producer surplus is 8. And again, if you find it easier to display it here, you know, they get the price of 6, and then you have to do it with reference to the true supply function. You can do that too, but I'll just place it here quickly. Okay, so now total surplus is obviously not 8, because what did we say? Well, we said welfare is consumer surplus plus producer surplus plus tax revenue minus social cost from the minus the subsidy cost minus subsidy. But now what we also need to do is we still have to subtract the social cost. Okay, so why do we have to subtract the social cost? Well, because we got to pay for it. you see again there's this overlap of consumer surplus and producer surplus, and so we have to subtract that, and so because it is a cost we have to subtract it. So how big is the social cost? Well, the social cost is SC, so we have a quantity turned over of 4, but each unit turned over comes with the social cost of 2, so we have 8 in social cost. So this total social cost is now this area here, and you see this area is 8, so now social cost is 8. So that means our total welfare is, or total surplus is consumer surplus plus producer surplus. 8 plus 8 is 16, minus 8 is 8. But in the social optimum it should be 9. So we have a deadweight loss of -1, and I'm very sure you can already see where that deadweight loss shows up. And again, we have like an inefficient overproduction. So we produce too much of a bad thing. So this black triangle, that is a deadweight loss, which is again the result of an inefficient overproduction, because on the supply function you see beyond the social optimum, which is at a quantity of 3, we have only consumers left whose willingness to pay is much less than the true cost of production. So we inefficiently serve additional consumers with higher cost, but this time higher social cost plus private cost than what the true willingness to pay is. So again, we have a deadweight loss from an inefficient overproduction of scarce resources. Okay, I'll stop here, and on the next video we turn to a positive externality.